Welcome to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps, a bi-weekly podcast with me, Dr. Kish Cumi Price. Hello and welcome back to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps. I'm Dr. Kish Cumi Price, and I am joined by a special guest today, Dr. Destiny Livers. She is a tremendous advocate in the space of educational leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she also just happens to be one of my good friends and mentees. And I'm excited to have this discussion with her around what her research is about and how it relates to professional bullying. Now, what I will share with you all is that this is a series podcast. So I highly recommend that if you haven't caught the first two episodes, that you go back so that you can catch up with us and understand what we're talking about today. So to get into it, Dr. Livers, your line of research is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically looking at leaders and their efforts in driving incremental changes in a challenging role. Can you break that down for us and share a little bit about the themes and discoveries that came out of your research?
As a DEI professional, some of the things that emerge from my research are things that we already know are challenges. As of now, we have states trying to dismantle DEI programs, roles, and initiatives. And so some of those themes that my participants found to be the greatest challenges are ultimately the role is just challenging in itself. And so it's not easy work. And oftentimes to move that needle forward, our work gets pushed back a little bit further each time. And so these challenges are ultimately due to societal challenges, the lack of buy-in and support, and racial battle fatigue because the role is tiring. Another thing that emerged is although the role is challenging, incremental challenges are made due to DEI leaders working to combat organizational and systemic barriers. This is done through leaders working through education and training, programmatic efforts, building relationships. But what I found interesting is that they described it as marginal success, which could also be synonymous with minimal. So this goes back to the needle being pushed forward, but only to be in a place where it's going to be pushed backward. And so finally, another theme that was emerged is leader support is essential for the needle to actually move forward. If there's not any leader support, that needle's not going to move forward. DEI initiatives won't be successful.
Wow. So when you were meeting with participants in your research process, did you hear from any of them about experiencing professional bullying at all? Like, was that something that came up?
Ultimately, they didn't describe it as professional bullying, but once you get into what bullying is and what professional bullying can be, such as feigning ignorance, a lot of them describe their leaders as leaders who ultimately are feigners of ignorance. So they don't necessarily describe it as bullying, but once I started to do my research, I started to realize that they were being professional bullied as well. Maybe they don't know it, or maybe that's just not the way they described it. They described it as the lack of support. But ultimately, they were being bullied. People know what they're doing when they are not supporting DEI efforts.
Can you break that down for us, that phrase of feigning ignorance?
Yes. So ultimately, when someone is a feigner of ignorance or is feigning ignorance, they are allowing people to be ignorant. So they are allowing people to act as if they don't understand what they are doing. But we live in a world of technology, so I like to say in that ignorance is no longer bliss. I know back in the day, you may have not known everything, but we live in technology and we have the world at our hands. So these leaders who feign ignorance, they are dismantling DEI in ways that they know, um, in ways that they know that some people or the people that are not necessarily educated won't question. So So when we say feigning ignorance, is ultimately they are supporting people not knowing.
Right, right. Which is dangerous. I mean, when you think about how that can be coupled with professional bullying,
Mhm.
what I mean, how do you think that plays into the whole scheme of things? Like if you're already dealing with these challenges that you just identified, and is also coupled with this professional bullying and maybe even your supervisors that are feigning ignorance, how does that play out?
It could result in a lack of motivation. So if you're someone who is working toward advancing DEI work, and you have leaders that are ultimately using passive and active resistance so that your work
Hmm.
does not move forward, you can feel unmotivated. It also can affect your mental health and your overall well-being because you feel like you have
Hmm.
to defend yourself all the time. And so not only are you defending yourself, but you're defending the work that you are so passionate about doing, the work that is needed to be done. Um,
Hmm.
but can you even really focus on that work if you're focused on like keeping your head above water?
Hmm.
Um,
Wow.
ultimately, those are the results of professional bullying within the DEI realm, and really just any
Hmm.
of work.
Hmm. Hmm. And I'm so glad you said that because we don't want to downplay what this is. So sometimes when you have labels or names or terms that you're using, people first have to try to understand what it is that you're talking about. So that's why we said, really go back to those other episodes to hear about, the what professional bullying is, what it looks like. And in the last episode, we talked about Dr. Bonnie Bailey and her experience with professional bullying that ultimately resulted in her suicide. And I think that this whole concept that you just shared with us around feigning ignorance is so pervasive,
Hmm.
not just I mean, definitely in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. When you're doing that work, when you are, that's your job, but it also happens in everyday life, especially to minoritized populations, and in a way in which is seen as if we don't know what you're talking about or we don't understand. And I'm wondering about that process, how if you can speak to your personal experience with that in the workplace, because I know you have personal experience around professional bullying. What was that like for you?
Ooh, okay. Question, because as I
Yeah.
thought about all of the roles that I've held, I've realized that my like professional bullying started in my very first professional role. So that was when
Wow.
I came straight out of college, and first year teacher. My very first few years of teaching, I experienced a bully. And so
Mm.
this person would literally talk about me to my mentors, would talk about me to the admin staff. And so, I mean, they would even go as far as to come in my room, slam my door, spread rumors about me. Um, and
Wow.
so they were believable though. So they had the belief.
Mm.
So everybody believed them because one, they were at the school longer than I was. And then two, I can come off a bit feisty. So everything that comes from my mouth seems more of like a defense mechanism, but it's really passion. It's how
Passion.
I
Yeah.
am. And so that was the very first bully I experienced in a professional role. Now, I like to think that I'm not bullyable, which is why people aren't successful. So although I experienced it, that ultimately it didn't really affect me in my role. I did start to like shut down. And so I no longer spoke in certain meetings, or I just wasn't as active in my role the way I was when I first started. So maybe that's the way that it affected me. I was
Mhm.
kind of like, if you don't want to hear what I have to say, then I'm just not gonna say it. So
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
attitude that I took on from that experience, and I feel like I wasn't protected by leadership.
Mm, mm. Now, in that particular situation, did you feel like you could share with leadership what was going on, or did you feel like you couldn't? Because I know you just mentioned the other person was more senior and believable. So,
I feel like I could, but it okay. So you know how you have the family, like your family, but it's toxic. Like you can say stuff, um,
right.
but it's not. It really we kind of sweep it under the rug in our families. So that's what it was. It was like, oh, we're family. We'll just sweep this under the rug. Oh, just get over it.
Okay.
Scripture was thrown at me, or certain things were just
Yes.
thrown at me to like sweep it under the rug. Oh, that's just it's kind of like, it was like the toxic family. Because I did feel like I could say things and I did feel like I could speak up, but it wasn't
Mhm.
ever really addressed.
I see. Okay. And as a result of that, did it play a part in your desire to remain in the role, or
It did.
was it just kind of in the background?
It did. I mean, it was in the background for a while, and then I just at that point wanted to leave. So I
Mm,
started to, okay, the grass has to be greener on the other side. This is what I was thinking.
hmm.
And one of my
Right.
mentors was just like, I just need you to go. I really need you to go. I'm tired of hearing you talk about
Yeah.
all the things that are happening. So just leave. And
Hmm.
what I did eventually.
You know, well, I wonder too about that because I think a lot of people may be questioning if you've never experienced this exactly how it plays out. You know, we we tend to use the term, bullies and then victims of bullying, but it's really targets, right? Like you're not, you may feel victimized in the process, but bullies are targeting people. And in the last episode, we talked about the types of folks that bullies tend to target. And it's usually more competent, likable people because there's something within the bully that envies the target, right? And so the other side of this is what I think, I guess I will say that, and I know personally I experienced this, is that you're not able to be your best self
Mm-mm.
because as much as you're trying to bring all of you into a space or a role, it's really difficult to remain at a 100% when you have this draining that's happening, and it can impact you in a way that it does, kind of drive you out because you're like aware of the fact that you're not at 100, and you're like, why am I here if I can't be all of me? Why am I here if I have to deal with this? And it feels like there's no way out because, as you said,
Mhm.
you didn't feel like you had the support from leadership. So
So you become
I
unproductive.
what's
And
that?
so you become unproductive is what
Yes,
um,
yes.
felt like, or not even just unproductive. You feel like, I know at one point I felt like um I was saying all the things, and then I would have a friend tell me, "You're not saying, it's not what you're saying, it's that you're the person saying it." And
Mm,
so I just
hmm.
kind of got to the point where if you don't care what I have to say, then why am I here? I can just
Right.
take my talents elsewhere.
Exactly. Exactly. And the other piece of that, I wonder, did you feel like, I know you said you didn't have support from leadership, but did you feel like you had support from other colleagues?
Um, a few, but again, this person was so good at getting people to believe the image that they put up
Hmm.
that really not many people, I would say not many people knew that it was going on. Admin knew,
Mm-hmm.
the people closest to me knew, but I was
Mm-hmm.
like, other people may have not
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
known.
And that's not, yeah, that's not rare. I mean, that's typically what happens with professional bullies is that they're believable. They are able to convince people of their narrative. They put forth a facade that's very different than who
And
they really are in interactions and engagement as well. So that makes a lot of sense.
yeah, I just remember I started to reflect like at the years later.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember this person taking like myself and other like fresh new teachers out to eat, and some of the things that they were saying, they basically told us, and manipulation is a way of bullying. But they
Mm-hmm.
would say, if this gets back, we know we can't trust you.
Oh, wow.
So, and I didn't like at the time when it happened, we were like just excited to be, teachers at this point. So at the time,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really know what that was, or I didn't even really look into it. But as I started to reflect, years later, that was definitely a way of bullying, because manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
that was straight manipulation. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, that it started very early. I just didn't even know.
Wow. And as I know you said it ultimately drove you out of the role and somewhat profession.
Mhm.
What when you were looking for like the greener grass on the other side, did you find that? Did you find a safe space that was, professional bullying free, or did you encounter more?
No, once I left that role, I went to another role within the same organization.
Okay.
And I wasn't necessarily bullied in that role. This
Hmm.
was during COVID, so everything was
Hmm.
just weird during COVID. But
Hmm.
then they, the role in which I held then, it was an instructional technology coach role, and it
Okay.
became more of like IT. So I didn't enjoy it,
I
which
see.
is why I left
Okay.
that role. But then
Okay.
the next role I held, yeah, the grass was greener, but that was because of my direct supervisor. But
Okay.
professional bullying is definitely happening within the organization.
Okay. And in that capacity, what was that experience like?
It was great
Hmm.
until my direct supervisor left. It was the best. I was learning so many things from an amazing person. But once my direct supervisor was gone, everything went downhill.
Okay.
That's when the professional bullying started within the like my next realm of professional bullying.
Mm, got it. Okay. And in that capacity, did you have any indicators like in that since you had already experienced it before in a previous role, were you almost like instantly aware that it was professional bullying, or did it take time for you to get
I
to a place
wouldn't
to say, yeah,
I wouldn't say I was instantly aware. I just thought that's who that person was. That person's just nasty.
okay,
That's ultimately what I
okay,
thought. Like, okay, and then this person held the most power. So that
mhm,
also plays a part in like how much you can say in or do. So, because they
mhm,
held the power within the organization, you kind of just let it happen. And I wouldn't even say that I let it happen, because I let it happen for probably 2.5 seconds and I was gone.
mm,
But
okay,
this person was also one, you the power that they hold, the status that they hold. So they got me
mhm,
back. It's like they reeled me back in and like, please come
mhm,
back. And so I went back and it was worse.
mhm.
Oh no, it was very
Wow.
much so worse when I went back.
Mhm, mm,
That's when I realized that, oh yes, this is absolute bullying. And I think I could see it a little bit better because it was happening to people under me.
mm, mm. Interesting. So you saw it more in other people's experiences. You were able to label it better that way than your own direct experiences.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once it started to happen to the people under me,
Hmm.
and I realized, like, again, that was my direct supervisor. I was the next person in that department. I was the next person in leadership. So it was my direct supervisor, then myself, and then the people up under us. Um, I just my very first conversation with my direct supervisor, I recorded because
Mm.
it was between he and I, and then somebody that was up under us. And the way that he talked to that person, um, I knew it wasn't right from day one. Like as soon as the conversation started. So I started recording it. And that's when I started to realize, well, I had learned to start documenting things from my previous experiences. But that's when I realized, oh yeah, this is bullying. And then once it was brought up and once it was addressed with leadership, it was pretty much a joke.
Hmm.
It was not even pretty much a joke. It was a joke. Our feelings were not validated at all.
Hmm. And how did that result for you in, how you felt about that after you shared with leadership but didn't get any support?
So if I wasn't going to share with leadership because I already knew that they didn't care, but they called myself and another person and pretty much was like, "Are y'all just defiant, or is this person really that bad?" And I'm thinking, this person is really that bad. Well, at the end of the conversation, would you mind sharing this on a call with everybody? And of course, so we're thinking everything, okay, everything's coming to light. We're going to find a solution. All of these things. And no, I mean, that was probably one of the most embarrassing, I mean, kind of humiliating moments because you put me on this call to say everything that's going on and how we're feeling and what we're experiencing, and then you allow the person bullying us to call our feelings bullshit.
Wow. Like literally saying that.
Mhm. Your feelings are bullshit, is what they said. And so we got
Hmm.
quiet. The other person and I got quiet. We didn't really have much to say after that. After that, we knew, like I said, I don't really even think this conversation is productive. And so our leader was like, "Well, I think it is because I'm the leader." Okay, well, I don't feel like this is productive. And the other person was like, "I'm just gonna continue to do my work and move on."
Hmm.
Well, prior to all of this conversation, I knew I wasn't gonna be there long. I'm one, I
Hmm.
don't mind if the workplace is toxic leaving. So,
Hmm.
I don't know if that was just like God's timing because
Hmm.
that night I got a call about a job offer. 2 job offers actually.
Wow.
So I had a choice. And so when I called, I tried to give this person like the courtesy of, "Hey, that call today, I couldn't deal with it, and I'm not going to be subjected to somebody talking to me like they're crazy." I told her, I said, "My grandmother doesn't talk to me like that." So a leader won't either. And so I called. Well, can you just stay? What if I promise that you don't have to work with this person? Just empty promises, which again goes back to um withholding support. That goes back to
Hmm.
um the whole feeding ignorance aspect of it, or the whole aspect of gas. It was really kind of like gaslighting. You knew that we weren't going to be moved, or we were still gonna have to work with this person. So I said no, absolutely not, and I left.
Wow. In that experience, were you in a place, because I'm hearing from, hearing the things that you're sharing, and it sounds very much like a person who's seeking resolve and wanting things to improve and get better and thinking that you're going through the proper channels to make that happen,
Mhm.
only for it not to be resolved and for you to feel even worse than you did previously because now everything's exposed, but nothing's done about it.
Mhm.
So, I mean, did it in that circumstance, did you feel like it was kind of rock between a rock and a hard place, like I have to leave at this point? Or did you feel like it was possible to stay?
No, no, I did not feel like it was possible to stay. And the reason I say that is because yes, I have my doctorate. Yes, I'm a professional. Yes, like all of these things are true, but in the same token, I'm still a human. And so there's only
Mhm,
so much that I can take before any person snaps. And I didn't want to snap, whether that has
mhm,
been verbally, um, however,
mhm,
like you never know what like your meltdown might look like. So
mhm,
that could have been health wise, mentally, emotionally. I didn't want
mhm,
that to happen. And so I
mhm,
ultimately chose myself. And by this point of my life, I had already like I've already grown. I had already grew to know that I'm gonna always choose myself over a job or
mhm,
over people. So I
mhm,
knew by then, yeah, no. If it was early on in my career, I probably would have felt different. But
mhm.
because at this point I'm like, no, I know what I bring to the table. No, I was done.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, to say that you chose you, and that you were aware that it was a choice, but that is the part that we have to be aware of, is that professional bullying requires you to have to choose yourself, right, over the work that you want to do.
Mhm,
Because, I'm sure you felt like the work was work that you enjoyed and was fulfilling, but the bully created a toxic environment that didn't allow you to enjoy your work and put you in a place where you felt like you had to choose yourself and preserve yourself and your sanity over the work that you wanted to do, which is,
it's
talk a
unfortunate.
little bit about that.
It's unfortunate because that is a battle that I think a lot of people face, choosing the work that
Hmm.
they are passionate about and want to do. And so it resulted in me going and doing work that I ultimately didn't want to do. But then I was miserable.
Hmm.
And I only
Yeah.
stayed at the road for 3 months. Um,
Mm.
so those type of like then you pick and choose and now it's like you're back to doing the work that you want to do, but it's like, oh, okay, like everything is nothing's perfect, so it's like, am I gonna do what I want to do and put up with all the nonsense, or am I gonna
Hmm.
do what I don't want to do and pretty much like just be here working,
Yeah.
be a worker
And
bee.
I mean, I commend you for making that choice, because it is difficult. And sometimes I think from an identity standpoint, professionally, once you've grown in your career and professional experience, you get to a place where sometimes it's difficult to separate the two, your work identity from who you are. And so when you're being attacked in your workspace, it's an attack on you, it's an attack on your career, it's an attack on your profession, your name, your reputation. And it can really take its toll. And especially when you're in an organization that doesn't have healthy support
Hmm.
for these situations where you have an HR department that actually can respond appropriately, that you can document things and have, create this um, place of support for all of this. It typically doesn't exist. And in a lot of, definitely not in a lot of nonprofit, small nonprofit organizations, and um, even some of the larger ones. So my question is, how do you believe, if you were talking to young professionals, like your younger self, not knowing that this was on the other side for you, what tips would you give to young professionals entering the workforce about how to prepare for professional bullying, or even how to screen for it even?
So, and it's funny because I know we talked about the last role that I held and what I went through there, but then the next role that I was so excited to take on was great at first.
Hmm.
So a lot of the
Right.
times something is like things are masked. Um,
Yeah.
I do think our smaller organizations that operate more of like a family are able to do that. And
Hmm.
so just a little bit like I felt like I was starting to be professional bullied in that role too, because
Hmm.
at one point my direct supervisor gave me this list of things that I quote unquote was not doing that was a part of my role. Mind you, I had been in this role for a whole year. So my thing is, why didn't you train me on it? And then it was okay, you give it to me in November and say I need you to do it in January. But we're
Hmm.
off a whole week in January and a whole week in December. So when are you going to train me on these things? Which is
Hmm.
also another way of bullying people because you're giving them unrealistic expectations.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that, but it was great. Everything was amazing. And I think things started to go left when I started to again speak up for people that were also being bullied.
Hmm.
And a lot of organizations don't like for people to question their motives. Um,
Hmm.
they don't like for people to actually speak out. And
Hmm.
I'm that person.
Hmm.
So it becomes, I feel like I become a problem sometimes.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if I were talking to my younger self, your first piece of advice you would think would be, oh, go tell the management team or go report it to HR. But in a lot of my experiences, my management team and HR were the bullies
Hmm.
on the bully.
Hmm.
So it was ultimately the culture. And so,
Hmm.
so for example, like in that very first role, I didn't feel like I had the leader support. So going to management, going to HR isn't always the answer. Now, if I were talking to my younger self and management and HR are the people that you can report to, or if you do have that trust or you do believe that you can go to them, then that would be like my very first piece of advice is going to who you can trust. And then that
Hmm.
goes along with the next piece of advice is finding community. Find people that you can trust because you're going to need it for your mental health and your not only just your mental health, but just like your overall well being. Um,
Hmm.
so let's see documentation. I would say document
Yes.
everything. Keep everything documented. That's super important because then it can corroborate the story or the action.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
And so, being that I am a person that is vocal, and was raised on advocacy, I can, like I said earlier, come off as feisty. I call it passion. So we all call it different things, and I'm always stand up for what's right. But I
Hmm.
also had to learn how to create boundaries, and so that is where
Hmm.
it came to knowing that, like, like I'm worth more than this. I'm not gonna stay here. Like I can't do that to
Hmm.
myself.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then I tell my staff now, um, advocate for yourself. It's okay to advocate for yourself. You would be
Hmm.
surprised how many times I've had to tell my staff to advocate for themselves at this very role that I hold right now.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so if I had to talk to my younger self, those are some of the things that I would tell myself, and it doesn't. I don't really feel like I have the answer all the way because I'm
Hmm.
still sometimes very shocked when I hear about some of the things that people experience or now witnessing some of the things that people experience.
Hmm.
So I do think it's one of those things where you just have to keep like I'm learning all the time.
Hmm.
So you might not have the answer, but just always be solution focused.
That's good. That's really good. And I think, out of those tips that you shared, something that really, I think, penetrated for me was when you said establish a community. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes because work, depending on what your line of work is, can be consuming and you feel like your community is only at work, like that, the people you work with are your community. You might be able to find people there, but you might not. And it's okay if you don't. but it is important to have that community, even if they are outside of the workplace. And to be honest, those are some of the safer connections that you can have, because sometimes it's difficult to know who has been tainted by the bully in a way that they, are you being vulnerable with someone who's actually sharing your information in a way to sabotage or try to push out, right? Because that really is what the bully's intent is to
Correct.
push you out of the way in whatever capacity, whether it's out of the role, out of their space, their, you know what I mean? So I think that was for me something that is huge. And then the creating boundaries and advocating for yourself, like that is, all of these nuggets are, I think, highly applicable. And I just appreciate you sharing your journey and dropping these nuggets for everybody. Do you have any closing thoughts about this?
The It's funny because I guess another little tip or nugget, or just like one thing to remember, is don't lose yourself in the process, because the very last um case of professional bullying that I've experienced really sent me into a state of depression, and it made me
Mm-hmm.
start to feel like maybe I'm not who I think I am, or maybe I'm not really as smart as I think I am. Maybe I'm not as productive as I think I am. Because it was life changing. I'll say that it was life changing. And so I started to become who I never want to be, because I'm all about advocating for people. I'm all about empowering people. I live by the
Mm-hmm.
whole quote of aspire to inspire. Like that's ultimately what
Right.
I feel like my purpose in life is to do, is to inspire other people. But
Mm-hmm.
I know at one point, then like me feeling like I had to defend myself, I became a bully, and I was willing to make someone uncomfortable every chance I got, because I felt like they violated me,
Yeah.
or they violated
Yeah.
the people that I love. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, it was kind of like, okay, you bullied me in the workplace, or you're bullying me in the workplace because you have the power. But what
Mm-hmm.
about in these streets? Do you have the power in
Right.
the streets? So I found
Right.
myself taking more time than needed to bully or to make someone feel uncomfortable. And so I say
Mm-hmm.
that to say is like, don't lose sight of what you are meant to do on this earth, because
Mm-hmm.
of other people and what they lack. Because I felt
Mm.
myself. I really felt myself. Like, I mean, there were things that I would like think about in my head, like, okay, this person should be here at this time, or maybe I'm going just because they're gonna be there. Like, I would literally map those things out in my head, and no person
Right.
gets you to that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they did, and I'm still working on myself
Mm-hmm.
when it comes because it was a
Yes.
very life changing event. And
Yeah.
I don't think people realize how it really affects your mental health,
Mm-hmm.
your emotional health. I literally went through a state of depression. I didn't want to talk to
Mm-hmm.
anybody for a long
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
There were days that I woke up crying, just questioning myself, my professional self,
Mm-hmm.
my just everyday self. Like, I was literally questioning who I was. And if
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a strong sense of who I was in a strong community around me, I don't think that I think it could have been worse. I think I could have
Mm-hmm.
made decisions that ultimately hurt me in the end, because at some point somebody was like, Destiny, you have got to stop. You can't bully people. Like, but it was
Mm-hmm.
hurt people. We know that.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, it's just don't lose sight of who you are, because someone else doesn't determine your worth.
Mm. My
Your
God.
work doesn't determine your worth. I know
Right.
my doctoral program, she used to tell us that our research didn't determine our worth. So just
Right.
hearing that in different ways and being able to comprehend that and really put that into my life can help
Mm-hmm.
me make the decisions that I ultimately make every day.
Yeah. Listen, that is so good. And I hope that it helps our listeners, whether you are someone who's been targeted through professional bullying or you know someone who is, or if this is foreign to you and you don't have any idea what we're talking about, we are grateful that you can no longer feign ignorance, or we hope that you won't, and will be aware and can try to be an advocate for others and come alongside others. Because as Dr. Livers just shared here about the community and having that support, that is key. And just as we shared in the last episode that the professional bully likes to build a case and get
Mhm.
advocates for their case, the same thing is happening with that target. They need advocates. So you get to choose. And we talk about this, right? This is why I'm doing this podcast, is because we have to call this stuff out. And
Mhm.
then we have to hold you accountable, listeners, for where you stand. You know, are you a bully? Are you a wimp? Are you a poverty pimp? Are you somebody who's just, because the wimps are the folks who are aware that somebody's being bullied and they're doing nothing about it. And it's time to stop that, because everybody's going to be held accountable for what they do on this earth. That's my belief. I don't know what everybody else believes. If you think you're about to die and come back as a butterfly, cool. But in my belief, you will be held accountable for what you do here. And I just want to close, I think, by saying the other side of this is, I hope that if you have been targeted like us, that you will not become a cynic or pessimistic about people in general, because that's the other
Mhm.
side of this, is that it can also cause you to just not want to mess with anybody. Like, I remember when my most recent situation with professional bullying, I was just like, you know what? I don't want to deal with adults at all. I'm back to working with kids. That's where I started. Kids are, you know what I mean? You know what you're getting with kids. That's those are my people. And I just say that because a lot of times you being targeted, as we said at the beginning of this episode and then the last one, you're being targeted for a reason. You're being targeted because of who you are, what you have in you. And that bully sees your potential. They see what you're able to accomplish, and they are threatened by who you are.
Yeah, they
So
start
don't allow,
that.
yeah,
They start questioning your
yeah.
credentials. They start questioning everything. Oh,
Mm-hmm,
you're not qualified. They're not qualified. Okay.
mm-hmm,
So yeah, I mean, ultimately, people are ego driven, and
exactly.
they're all around us. I would say even go as to far as to say we're ego driven because everybody wants to do good.
Mm-hmm,
Everybody wants to be recognized for their work in some type of way. Um,
mm-hmm,
but some people are so ego driven that they'll do whatever, including hurting people, to rise. That's a whole
mm-hmm.
different space of being like that. That's just something
Yes.
different. So, but I think we have to learn that abuse is unacceptable, and you can't be
Mm-hmm,
what you call a wimp and just
mm-hmm.
allow it to happen because you're enabling
Exactly.
actions.
There we go. That enabling is key, because it's just as toxic. Like, you are assisting that person in doing what they're doing. So you can't pretend that you're not a part of the abuse, because you are. You're a participant. So I really do hope and pray that, if you're listening, and as we said, if you've been targeted, that you find hope in what we've shared. Hopefully, you can create some boundaries, find a safe space, find your people, and don't allow anybody to treat you less than who you are. Right? Like, know your worth, and that's what Dr. Livers was just sharing. Keep that in front of you, and I do believe there's a way to change
Mhm.
the narrative and the perspective that you have about who you are and what you're about. Because if you are targeted, then they're targeting me for a reason. So don't forget that, right? Don't forget that part. Like, that is happening intentionally because of who you are. So continue to show up, continue to show them who you are, and don't allow them to drive you into a space where that's not even who you are. I'm not about to get on your level. It's taking too much energy to go that low.
Mhm.
So I will stay where I am. And in that space, I will be able to have freedom of thought. Like I will be able to know how to move, how
Mhm.
to increase my power in what I'm doing. And that's ultimately what they want to keep you from doing anyway.
Mhm.
So it it'll serve its purpose in multiple ways. So I'm just listen, this has been like therapy for real. So I appreciate you sharing sharing with us today, Destiny. And I hope that this has encouraged folks. And we look forward to connecting with you all on the next round. And I just would like to close with the reminder that I share every time we close, which is be bold, be courageous, be unpimped. And we'll see you next
Mhm.
time.